broadcast. We got to get everybody kind of lined up here. Kim, can you unmute and join in, please?
I certainly have.
Great, thank you. So I think everybody's on the presenters are on the webinar, and most of you know our routine. If you can hit the raise your hand button and let us know if you can hear us out there in the audience, we'd appreciate it. Yep, the hands are going up. Thank you very much. That lets us know that we don't have some major problem there. All right, good morning and welcome to CAD-1's Part 2 presentation of Technology Advancements and Autodesk Subscription Model. We did one of these, we did the first in this series back in, I believe it was November. I can't exactly remember, but I think it was early November there. And Kim Renshaw, the Director of North American VAR Channel Sales at Autodesk, was gracious enough to join us and do the bulk of the presentation. At that time, you know, Kim did a wonderful job for us, and we all thought it would be a good idea to come back and kind of track the progress of many of the questions that people had during the first webinar and so forth, and where several things weren't 100% clear. So today we're going to be talking some about, you know, kind of what has been cleared up, so forth and so on. Now, I do want to give a little bit of a preamble here. The first part of this webinar, Kim is going to go over some of the reasons behind this, the thinking behind this move, and so forth. To many of you who were on the previous webinar, you will have seen some of this material before, so you know, just bear with us. It's important that there's a lot of new people on this webinar too, so it's important that we kind of get the background laid out for and the foundations laid out for everybody to understand why Autodesk is making some of these moves and so forth. And then about 15 minutes in or 20 minutes in or so forth, we'll get into the heart of the matter. Kim has a lot of good answers that have been firmed up. There's still a few things that we have maybe partial answers for, and there's a couple that still haven't been completely cleared up, but we're going to kind of continue this series as the answers come along to keep all of our good customers and friends informed. So with that preamble, I'm going to welcome Kim Renshaw, and thank you very much for joining us, Kim.
Well, thank you, Stan, and thank you for kind of setting the stage for what we're going to talk about, because I think you shared a really important point that as Autodesk has been going through this transition, and it's been we're about 2 years into it, and have a little less than a year to go. We have released information as it has been available, so it may not always be as complete as people want it and the timing they'd like to have it. But I think we have been trying to make an effort to release stuff as we can go. And as you shared, I've got a little bit more information I can share than I did when we all got together back in November. So as you also commented, I'm going to take a few minutes and just kind of talk about some of the shifts within the market that drive a lot of changes that take place, particularly with a company like Autodesk, and then dive a little bit deeper into what those changes are. So let me just start with,
Hey, Kim, real quick before you do start, just a kind of a housekeeping issue. If you do have questions, folks in the audience, please feel free to type them into the question box, and many of them will probably be answered along the way, but if they aren't, we will get to them as we progress through the webinar. So with that, Kim, take it back over there.
Okay, now that was a great point to share, because if we don't have the details available today to the questions that you might ask, that does allow us and CAD-1 to follow back up with you as soon as that information is available. So thanks for pointing that out, Stan. As I shared, let me just kind of start from a high level, and meaning that, you know, technology has always disrupted how things are made. And really what we're moving into is it's also now impacting how things are used, how they're sold, and how they're serviced. And this is true across a number of industries, and really has some interesting impacts, particularly to the AEC and construction market. But if we look at some examples, from a broader scale, right? We see individual devices being custom made, manufactured as a one-off. Medical devices are a great example of that. We also see companies expanding in terms of taking their knowledge and applying it to new product lines. And a great example of that is with Rolls-Royce with their Power by the Hour program. And they are really changing the fundamental business model related actually to selling jet engines. And the third example I'd like to use relates both from a product standpoint but also into the building space of the world, and that's with Google's Nest. And, you know, Google is not just selling Nest because they want to sell thermostats. Instead, they see Nest really as a piece of the connected home and a way to expand their reach. So clearly, I think we all can recognize and see where technology advancements really have the potential to impact a wide range of businesses, how products, components, spaces are used, how things are sold, as well as how they're serviced. And this also has reach to impact your business itself in terms of how you work with your clients and how you yourselves either do your design, construction, or production. And when we look at this, you know, disruptive technology, and that's the way we word it, and let me kind of share that disruptive doesn't necessarily mean it's a negative thing. And some folks can hear that word and view it as negative, but we use the term disruptive technology because it really drives changes in processes and how people are working and actually creates new opportunities. So in many ways, it's a positive disruptive. Now, if it's someone or a market that really resists change and doesn't like change, I suppose they could view that as a negative. But when you look at disruptions in technology, even historically, they have brought new advantages and opportunities along with them. And so let me just drill a little bit deeper in terms of how we see some of this disruption coming within buildings and how those are changing. You know, physical things are now being more highly connected to one another and becoming deeply interconnected systems. The physical and the digital interconnection creates new opportunities which add value to built assets and spaces. The Nest thermostat, which I mentioned earlier, actually learns an occupant's behavior and offers better environmental control and energy efficiency. This data-driven insight about how we use a space is scaling up to the environments like the Midfield Airport Terminal building in Dubai, which has a very sophisticated technology in place for handling baggage handling, for duty-free items, and even for more efficiently processing of passengers. It gives us a way to respond to the demand for high performance across so many dimensions. A couple of examples can be occupancy levels, energy performance, and water usage. And when I talk about it, I mean really this interconnection of systems and access to data. The connected systems will create opportunities for building owners and occupants, designers and contractors, and product manufacturers, literally the entire ecosystem, to extend their collective capability. In the future, buildings and their elements will generate streams of data, and these objects will be the data with which we'll use analysis to form connected systems, really as insight throughout the entire process and construction process. We'll understand through these linkages how spaces and structures perform in terms of both systems, both economically and even environmentally. We'll have more insight and control from any place at any time, and this really is a key to reduce energy consumption, build more efficiently, even develop more responsive spaces. The vision can be as big as the market and the consumers and those that use the products and spaces want it to be. The key takeaway is we can actually see big impacts that can be made from each small decision, whether that decision is made during the design or during construction, during the operation, or even in the occupation of a space. All of these can have the opportunity to make a big impact going forward. Now, some of these things I shared with you may or may not be things that your clients or your business is experiencing today. If they're not, I can tell you that they soon will be. There's such a need and a desire for highly efficient buildings and maximizing usage and streamlining processes that all of this will start to impact, again, the entire ecosystem that we look at. The key question for you to ask, and one thing for you to evaluate, is what are the technologies that you're currently using? What are your processes? What are you doing to maintain your competitiveness? How do you differentiate yourself in the market, as well as what are your clients and customers asking for to differentiate themselves, and how can you help deliver to help them do that? You know, as we talk about disruptions within technology, it also leads to where there's also been changes and underlining changes actually in the evolution of the technology that's used to actually do the design. So prior to this, we were talking about just the industries and the markets themselves. So as I shift to the design software, from an Autodesk perspective, we divide this evolution into 3 technology eras: the era of documentation, optimization, and connection. The era of documentation was focused on digitizing existing processes and managing the data that resulted. It provided efficiencies but did not fundamentally change the processes. The era of optimization provided new ways to solve problems that could not be solved effectively with traditional development or physical prototyping processes. This allowed companies to increase their capabilities and reduce costs, as well as time to market. The era of connection, which is really where we're entering in today, extends the ability of companies to connect their business processes and collaborate with stakeholders, and to change the way they operate, to transform from a product-only business to an enterprise model where products become platforms for services. You know, it's interesting, we've seen many of our customers, and maybe even some of you on the phone, even from an architectural or design build standpoint or firm, where you actually have also started to extend your services into facilities management and maintaining those buildings and designs that you have designed or constructed for your clients, beyond just handing over the keys once the project's done. So many of you are doing much of this today. You know, when I go back to the eras, it's important also to realize that each era incorporates what came before. So what I mean by that is it's not as if documentation goes away when a company adopts optimization. And similarly, a company that moved into the era of connection still optimizes products during development. What is changing, though, is the capabilities you need to compete are ramping up. We've talked a little bit about, at a very high level, some changes within the markets, some shifts that we see in terms of the eras of technology. And I also just want to break it down a little bit further in terms of how we can look at 3 major areas of disruptions within the market. And this really applies, the examples I'm going to talk about really apply to building, design, and construction, but again, it applies to all segments of the business. We can look at things via production, demand, and the products. By the means of production, we think that it really is an impact to how we think about and deliver buildings, both intellectually and physically. Both of these are changing. There's a shift in our attitudes about what intellectual property means, about who contributes to it and who owns it. Cloud and mobile technology means we can design anywhere and everywhere and with anyone we choose. When we talk about demand, or the nature of demand, by this I mean how customers want to interact with their space, how occupants drive what they need in a building, and what we produce in the design. All of these components are also evolving. Clients want high-quality projects that benefit from collaboration and achieve an excellence and a balance between cost, project risk, and rewards. The third area is really around the definition of the products themselves. And around the AEC world, I really talk about building, the assets, as well as the design that we use to construct them. Now, whether that's a piece of equipment, a system, or a whole building, what we see is a huge change in the production, nature of demand, and the definition of the products. All of this is happening because, again, the digital and the physical worlds are becoming very deeply intertwined. Now, with disruption, we've also seen a new creation or a new era of competition. This has happened historically, and we see that also happening today. This increased competition can be driven by 4 areas or buckets again. First area really is about everyone having access to unlimited processing power and how this will be able to solve the most complex problems. In fact, it'll probably be required to do so. We also see access to talent pools. So these seamless connections of talent so that the best ideas can come forward and are considered. Now, I've talked about this intelligent digital data, and that really is a play as we see digital connectivity of buildings and how it's really going to unlock new forms of value, not just to the owners and to the occupants, but again, feeding back into the design process for making new designs. The last area is really around capital. And what we see with this connection era is really a free access to capital by reducing risk, and it's also making possible access to sources of alternative financing, like crowdfunding. These capabilities, and this is the key, is going to be available to any company, regardless of size, type, or location. The barriers to access will be low. In this world, also, subscription is becoming a new norm. This is not unique to Autodesk or even to software. And I'd like to kind of sidestep just for a few minutes to talk about maybe some of the things some of you are already leveraging and taking advantage on a personal side in terms of accessing digital information, having access anytime, anywhere, including mobility and new devices. You know, a couple that I'm just going to hit on, and I think many people can relate to for years. Everybody, if they wanted to rent a movie, would go down to a local brick and mortar store. At one time, you may have been running a VHS tape, then we went to DVDs. But you went to see if the movie you wanted was on the shelf so you could watch it either that evening or a couple nights later. If the movie wasn't there, you either changed movie nights or you picked a different movie to watch. Today, more and more people are subscribing to a service that allows you to stream the entertainment that you want when you want it, to the location you want it, via the device that you want it. No longer do you have to wonder if that movie will be available. You can still go down to some brick and mortar stores, but again, we're seeing the shift where more and more are doing it by a subscription basis. Another example I'll share with you, and this is one I can relate to, is around navigational systems. I'm based outside of Atlanta, and a few years ago I bought a car and I had them put a navigational system in it, and I loved it. It was very valuable to me. And I still use a navigational system, except today I really don't use the one in my car as much as I use the one on my phone. So now today I can actually sit in my office, decide when do I need to leave for a meeting, what's the best route to go, all based on current information and traffic patterns. No longer do I have to be tied in my car to figure out when I should be leaving. And so again, these are just a few examples of things that we see in terms of subscription-based and access to mobile technology, digital information, how that's impacting personal lives. So again, it's really no different when we come back and look at it from a business perspective. So now I'd like to shift in and talk about Autodesk's continued shift to a subscription-based delivery for all of our technology solutions and provide you the data that's available today in terms of what your options are, due dates that are out there, and help you see why we're making this shift and where some of the additional value is brought. And the key thing is really to support the changes we see going in the markets of how people will be working in the future.
Kim?
Autodesk, yes.
If I may, what I'm impressed by is, you know, I know that the subscription is different for a lot of people, and, you know, ownership, and we'll get our arms around all this, but, you know, having had just a brief peek behind the scenes of what Autodesk hopes to do to be able to address the highly fluid marketplace where ideas change and platforms shift and you need access to this, that, or the other at any given time. What you have to understand is part of the reason Autodesk is doing making these changes is so that they can then upgrade or revamp the technologies that they develop to meet this much more fluid marketplace. And I think that that'll be the exciting next thing you'll see coming down over the next 5 to 7 years in increments that's really going to be fun to see. I've seen a few little brief glimpses, and I'm very excited about the future.
That's a great point. Thanks so much for stepping in and sharing that. I think your point is spot on. And you kind of lead, you know, I'll kind of build off of what you shared with, because as I talked about with some of the trends we see going in the market, where Everything will be available to new firms popping in, existing firms, as well as I talked about lower barriers, right? Because more people will have access to very high computing power, technologies, talent pools, and capital. One of those things I'll kind of build on is the reason why we're making the shift to a full subscription-based model is the desktop subscriptions, which is our subscription-based licensing, has a very low cost entry to barrier, meaning that if I contrast that to a permanent license today, the entry cost, you have a high cost to a permanent license when you purchase it today. Upfront investment is high, and then you have a little bit lower maintenance price to keep that going forward. The desktop subscriptions have a lower cost of entry. So it takes a lower dollar investment, and this becomes very valuable in a couple of areas, Dan, and as well for the listeners. One is that, say there's a new technology that comes out, or you have a new project that comes on board that needs additional technology that you're not using today, right? You can access that technology new to your processes, maybe to figure out how it works in your overall process or how it supports the project at a very low cost upfront. So it minimizes your risk, as well as you can pay for that software for the duration that you might need it. The other component to kind of build on what Stan was talking about, with the shift to a subscription base, it really allows, as there are ebbs and flows or increases or decreases back to a main, say, staffing level on projects, it allows companies to work much more budget effectively, so that if you have an increase in project flow, you can bring on licenses for the software that you need for the duration of those projects. And then when the crunch is over or you're back down to your normal workload, you don't have to retain the cost or the maintenance of those licenses. You can let those drop, and when you have an increase in staffing or workload, you can bring those licenses back on so you pay for them as you need them. Those types of flexibility, bringing in new technologies at a very low-cost investment, as well as having the flexibility of managing staffing and licensing needs as the projects dictated, both of those things bring flexibility that we haven't been able to provide in the past, and will be very important as technology continues to drive and change as we move forward. So let me kind of also step back and kind of give a big picture from a subscription standpoint that Autodesk has been delivering software via subscription vehicle for quite a number of years. Our maintenance subscription, which going back also went under the name of a VIP contract, we have been doing that for a number of years. And that contract allows you to maintain a permanent license, and it's the most cost-effective way to ensure that you have access to the most current release, some product support, as well as other benefits like previous use, home use licensing, etc. That has been probably what many of you listening to this webcast or participating on this call are experiencing today. About 2 years ago, we introduced the desktop subscription. And as I shared, it brings value and flexibility to our customer base that the permanent licenses did not, particularly for firms that are project-based. And we saw some strong adoption of our subscription-based licenses over the last 2 years, particularly in a couple of segments that very early on adopted because it met their need for staffing up and staffing down, as well as piloting and integrating new technology. Now, I'd like to just take a couple minutes and kind of compare these two for you. And I think there are a couple of key things that everybody should be aware of. One other advantage that the desktop license brings is that the license is tagged to the user. So with a permanent license, it's tagged to a device, right? Unless you have a network-activated license, and we'll talk about that in a few more minutes. But it's tagged to the device, and it doesn't provide necessarily the flexibility someone needs that if they have a machine at work, if they have one at home, if they have a laptop they travel with, or if they have a tablet they want to access software from. The desktop licensing is tagged to a user. So it allows me as a user to take my license and install it on as many devices as I would like, because it recognizes me as a single user from my login. So I can have an installation at the office, at home, on a laptop, on a device, and I can travel with it, and really provides more flexibility around accessing my software, my data from anywhere at any time. Now the third subscription type that I have shown here is our cloud-based subscription. And we have started to bring technologies to market via the cloud, things like A360, BIM 360, Fusion 360 are several examples. We'll continue bringing technology offerings via cloud subscription as well as our desktop subscription. Now, for many of you are also might be leveraging some of the benefits of some of our cloud services, because they also can be benefits to some of our maintenance of desktop subscriptions we have available. Now, for those of you from a just high level, I'm not going to talk a lot about the cloud offerings because there really isn't a whole lot of impact, and there's no really changes to that subscription model during this transition. But many of you may be familiar that with the cloud offering, my software is hosted in the cloud and my data generally is stored there to work on. That is not the case, again, with the desktop subscription. The desktop subscription, very much like the maintenance or the permanent license that you have on a maintenance subscription, is stored on your hardware device. Your data is stored there. And so, again, it has some of, I think, the best of both worlds that it brings to address providing flexibility, access to new technologies as we move forward. So let me share this slide with you, and I've tried to highlight a number of things that are in common. And again, really I'm going to focus on the maintenance and the desktop subscription because I think that's where most questions are evolving from, and that's also really what's impacted as we move through the last probably third of our transition as Autodesk. To revisit with the maintenance, again, a couple of key things I want to point out there. Many of you have your contracts in place on your permanent licenses. You can continue to do that for as long as you would like. You have your permanent licenses, you can use those indefinitely. And of course, the key to those licenses is your maintenance subscription contract, because that will provide basic support, latest software and product enhancements, as well as things like previous use rights, which I know is important to many as they're working on projects. Many of them have been archived in an earlier release, or they're finishing long-term projects and they need to maintain a version prior to the most current. So subscription enhancement provides that for you. One thing I'd like to share with everybody is, just with the same as with our desktop and our cloud subscriptions, we're trying to make maintenance subscription operate the same way, meaning maintenance subscription contracts after January 31st, you want to ensure that those contracts are renewed on time or prior to the expiration date. We have had customers in the past who have been able to take advantage of about a 30-day grace period. Some customers have renewed their contracts late in the past, and for some there have been late fees that needed to be accrued with that. After January 31st, late fees, grace periods, all of that will go away. So it will be key that you renew your maintenance contract, your maintenance subscription contract on time, or even a little early. If you renew it early, you're not double paying, right? We prorate it to pick up when your contract expires, but it ensures that the contract does not expire. You can renew a maintenance subscription contract up to 90 days before the contract end date. This is important because if you do, after the deadline dates I'm going to share with you later in this presentation, and I'll bring this point up again toward the end again because I think it's very important. After January 31st for some of our licenses and after July 31st for some others, if you let your maintenance contract expire, you will not have a way to renew that or reactivate that. You will be able to get back on subscription, but it will have to be underneath the subscription license model, the desktop license model we're talking about today. When we look at the desktop subscription, I've talked about a few things that it brings in terms of flexibility. I do want to share, though, that, again, the desktop subscription brings the same benefits that the maintenance subscription does. So things like previous use and flexibility of traveling with a little bit of extraterritorial global rights are there. One thing I will say is the permanent license. Obviously, you have that permanently. You can use that indefinitely. The desktop license, the holder of that license has that license for a specific amount of time. You can purchase a desktop license for 30 days, for a quarter or 3 months, for a year, and just like with maintenance subscription, you can also extend those contracts to be a 2 or a 3-year contract. In both the maintenance and the desktop subscription, this enables you to lock down today's pricing for the next 2 or 3 years, which makes it very easy from a budgeting standpoint. So again, you'll see the same benefits. You have the same full version of the software that's provided underneath a permanent license. Your software is installed on your local devices and your data is stored locally. And you also have the same access in terms of getting updates and support and all of those things that come with subscription. Now, one thing that is different about the desktop subscription license that I want to share with you is you do need internet access to install and activate the software. Now, this is true for many of you on the permanent licenses. You are currently used to downloading the new updates, you're getting your license file, and you're doing that over the internet. You need to do that also for the desktop subscription licenses. One difference is for what we call a single user, or what we would call a standalone license under a permanent. So it's just for one person, it's not networked. You do need to have access to the internet about every 30 days. You do not need to be on the internet all the time to work with a desktop subscription license, but you do need to ping into the internet every 30 days. So I can install my software, install my license and activate it. I can disconnect from the internet, work for 30 days, and about 7 days prior within the software, I'll be pinged to remind myself to log back into the internet to revalidate, and then I can disconnect again for 30 days. So there are a number of similarities, a number of additional benefits that the desktop subscription brings to the table. And one thing I want to share with you as we move forward, many of you may find about 3 different scenarios you could find yourselves working in with license environment. One, for many of you, you like having the permanent perpetual licenses and you want to maintain those on subscription so that you can continue to get the current updates. As a side note, if you don't have those on a maintenance subscription contract, again, you can continue to use those permanent licenses indefinitely, but they'll be frozen in the current release that you have them in. You don't have a way to upgrade those. Last year, we phased out our upgrade process, which drove us again to a complete maintenance subscription program for permanent licenses to be kept current. One other side note is if you have a permanent license today that is on a current release and it is not on a maintenance subscription contract, you still have the opportunity to put that on a maintenance contract between now and January 31st. After January 31st, you won't have the ability to add subscription to that license. So I want to let you know if you have a current release, you still have some time to evaluate if that's the direction you would like to go in. So as we go through this transition, we'll see that we still have customers that have the number of licenses that they need and they're maintaining those on subscription. We also will have the ability, yes?
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead and finish your thought, and then I have okay, a gentleman by the name of Will asked the question, and it's kind of in context here. Will has 9 seats of software, and they are on maintenance subscription. He wants to make sure that he can still take advantage of the home use or dual machine use rights with the maintenance subscription. He's in his question, I think he's a little bit confused about having to that might go away, or he has to move to a desktop subscription to get that. So basically, Will, if you keep your maintenance subscription intact, you will still be able to use the home use rights and so forth just as you have. Nothing will change there. It's only if you let that maintenance subscription lapse in some way that you'd have to move to the desktop, as Kim was just saying, and desktop subscription and work under those pretenses, which are pretty much the same anyway. But no, you don't have to change anything as long as your maintenance subscription is intact.
Great, you answered that perfectly, Stan. And I'll just kind of build on that by saying the benefits that are currently in maintenance subscription, we don't see any changes to those. So the same benefits are going to retain for maintenance subscription holders even after the deadline dates that I'm going to share. So thank you, Stan. And again, you answered that perfectly. That home use license under a permanent maintenance subscription is still one of those benefits. Many of you also, as you may have, and we'll kind of use Will's example, right? You've got some licenses currently that are permanent licenses. You have them on maintenance subscription. You also may find going forward that you have a hybrid work environment where you've got some permanent licenses and you have some desktop subscriptions. Those are very real work environments, and I'm going to circle back and give you some more information here in a few minutes of how that actually could roll out, particularly around networks. And of course, we see customers even today that are on fully desktop subscription environments. So as we move forward, Autodesk will be supporting, right, in terms from a support standpoint, we may be stopping selling new permanent seats, but the value and the benefits of your maintenance subscriptions will maintain. And we expect to still see some customers at purely a full permanent license configuration, some with a hybrid, and then some purely on a desktop subscription. Here's a slide that shows when it comes to some of these benefits within the subscription benefits, what you get with your maintenance subscription. You can see that you have them all in your desktop subscription. I'm going to talk about the coming soon there for network licenses. But again, you'll see one of the advantages that the desktop subscription option has is the pay-as-you-go option. And that goes back to being able to acquire a license for the 30-day, for the 3-month, or an annual license. I also want to take a moment and talk about Will had asked about the home use license. We also get questions around our global use rights. And currently under maintenance subscription contracts, and this is true for the desktop subscription contracts also, those licenses allow the user or a user to use the software outside or into other countries for a total of 90 days in any calendar year. You can't exceed 90 days, but if you need to go out of the country to work at an office or at a project, you can, within your license agreement, do that for 90 days. If you need to be able to utilize your software outside the country for more than 90 days within a particular year, that's where you need to acquire what we call extra territory rights or global territory rights. We refer to them as ETRs or GPRs, but that actually allows a company to purchase their licenses, say, here in the U.S., and be able to float those licenses around the world so it can kind of travel and follow the work clock to really maximize the usages of those licenses. So again, as with the benefits, they're the same for both, except the desktop obviously gives you more flexibility with the pay-as-you-go option. And you do have global rights, home use rights, and again, those global use rights are 90 days within a calendar year. So let me kind of shift and talk about that coming soon note that I have there, where it talks about network licenses. And this was a topic that I think other questions came up, Stan, when we were together back in November. And I've got some more information that we have released of how that will work for folks.
Yes, this was a big question.
Yeah, this was a big one. So we'll be introducing term-based network licenses. Now, I don't know what our final name of what we're going to call that will be. I'm sure it'll have a specific name to it. So for the time right now, I'm just going to call it term-based network licenses. Think of them as desktop licenses because they're subscription-only based, but they can be used in a network environment. And of course, you see many of the same benefits here that apply to what I was talking about with the desktop as a single user. That is what we're selling today, is a desktop single user. We will be introducing the network-based license, and I think really most of the questions people have is, well, how is this going to work, right? So here's some very high-level things I want to share with you, as well as provide you with this URL that can answer and provide more information about our term-based network licensing. The term-based network licenses will utilize the same licensing file technology that is currently used for permanent network licenses. So this means that the network license files can be merged. So if you have a permanent network set up right now of licenses and you need to add some term-based licenses to it in the future, you'll be able to merge those license files together. Also, both of those will be able to run on the same server if you choose. So again, you don't need to be running a separate server to host term or subscription-based licenses separate from your permanent. Same license server you can use. You also can use the same network license manager utilities. There's no new license utilities needed or any additional license utilities needed. Now, the term-based licenses, as I shared for a single user, I can purchase in a 30-day, quarterly, or a 1-year option. For the term-based network licenses, they'll only be available in 1, 2, and 3-year term timeframes. So the monthly or the quarterly will not be available to be added to a network. Now, one other thing I want to share with you is if, as we were talking about the desktop subscription licenses, and I talked about installing my software and being connected to the internet every 30 days. If that's a problem for customers, the answer for them is to use term-based network licenses. They operate the same way that your permanent network licenses do. There's no need or requirement to ping or access the internet on any interval. So the same way your network licenses work today will be the same way that your term-based network licenses will integrate into your existing network or even operate if you have a completely term-based network system within your office. These term-based network licenses are going to start to be available at the beginning of February. I don't have the exact date, but it'll be here within, I would expect, the first half of February of 2016. So just about a month away, I would hope. Again, here's a URL that's on the Autodesk public website so that if you have more questions, I don't have the time to go through all of them, but I wanted to hit some of the key highlights that I think are on the forefront of most people's minds of how they could be integrating this into their networks. So let me shift and kind of talk about the upcoming dates, and I actually want to share with you a list of the products that are impacted by it. So as I shared, you know, Autodesk has been going through this transition for the last couple of years, and we've got a little bit less than a year in front of us to go to complete our transition to take all of our products to a subscription base. The first key date that I want to make sure you're aware of is literally right around the corner, and that's January 31st. And this is when customers will have the last opportunity to purchase a new seat of most of our individual solutions. So again, an individual solution is I have a license and it allows me access to one of our technology. This deadline really impacts customers and companies who really are looking to purchase new software licenses. And as I shared before, those who currently have permanent licenses, you can continue to use those indefinitely, and it's key that if it's important to you to receive the updates, make sure you have access to the newest releases on your permanent licenses, that you maintain that maintenance subscription contract. Here is a list of the products that are affected by the January 31st date. It is most of our standalone products, but it's not all of them. Again, at the bottom, you can see the URL at the Autodesk.com site where you'll see this published list. Sometimes I think it's helpful at least to give folks this preview, and of course, CAD-1 can help direct you and confirm for you which one of your products are affected by the January 31st date. One other thing I'd like to share is why I've got this list up is if you currently own or want to purchase any more permanent licenses of the products you see on the screen now, you need to do that by January 31st. If you also have a standalone license, permanent license of one of these solutions, you have until January 31st to make it networked. So if you want a networked version of a permanent license of one of these solutions, you need to do that also by January 31st. After January 31st, you will not be able to do a network activation on that permanent license. If you want a networked version after that, of course, you'll be going to the term-based network license. The second date I want to share with you, which I think many of you might be familiar with, is July 31st. So we've got a little over 6 months before we hit this deadline. And this will be the last opportunity to purchase new seats of most of our suite solutions, as well as some additional standalones. And again, this really is the deadline impacts of who's looking to purchase new licenses, and they want them to be permanent licenses. Here is a list of the products for the U.S. and Canada that are affected with the July 31st date. So you can see the list of our design and creation suites as well as the additional individual products that are impacted by the July 31st date. Just as I shared about network activation, if you have a standalone license of these products, you want your permanent license to be network activated, you need to make that purchase and transition prior to the July 31st date. So let me hit a couple of common questions, and these are not all the same things that I talked through, Stan, when we were together in November, but I do want to hit on some that are very key and then some additional questions that seem to surface, and hopefully I might answer some questions for your customers. As I've talked about, if you have permanent licenses, these deadlines really are the deadline to be able to purchase additional permanent licenses. You continue using your licenses, and again, the key is that you keep it on maintenance subscription if you're interested in making sure that you always have access to the most current releases, you have access to previous use, home licensing, being able to have global rights for the 90 days, many of these other benefits of subscription, you'll want to make sure that's maintained. And as I shared earlier, and I just want to repeat it again, that if you have a currently you're on a maintenance subscription contract, and you let that contract expire, and it doesn't matter if it expires by a day or a month or 9 months, you let that contract expire, you will not have the ability to renew the maintenance contract. You can purchase then a subscription-based license contract to have a license that continues to be current and have the benefits of subscription. So if this is important to you, make sure that you work with CAD-1, and I encourage you to ensure that you renew them early so that you're not waiting to the last minute to do it and have a risk of having the contract expire on you. Again, you can renew up to 90 days before your contract expiration, and the payment gets applied to the end of your expiration date, so you're not double paying for any time, but you are ensuring that those contracts always stay current. Again, I talked and gave the example of that you will be able to work in hybrid environments, and it could be a hybrid environment within your core products, whether that be an AutoCAD or Revit or Civil 3D, or you may find that you're leveraging your desktop subscriptions with some complementary softwares like an advanced deal that you might need for a unique project. But again, you can work in a hybrid environment, and we are looking to shift all licenses that are sold right now underneath a permanent license to be made available as a desktop subscription license. And as I shared, it is our goal to shift everything and continue shifting everything as we have been doing to a subscription basis. Now, one question that does come up is what you can do with your permanent licenses after some of these deadlines. And as I did before, I'll walk you through a quick scenario. And let's say that I have a seat of AutoCAD today. It's a permanent single license, and I would like to have access to Civil 3D. I can, between today and January 31st, do what we call as a cross-grade. You can transition and pay to make that AutoCAD license a Civil 3D license. So no problem there. And you can put it on subscription, maintenance subscription. But what happens is February 15th, we're past this January 31st date, you have your seat of AutoCAD and you still need to have and want to have a permanent license of Civil 3D. Well, we're no longer selling Civil 3D as an individual product, but we will still be selling that product within the design suite for another 6 months. So you would have the ability to take your AutoCAD permanent license and transition that over to a suite solution as long as you do that by July 31st. After July 31st, we're no longer selling permanent licenses of all the products that I shared with you, so you really won't be able to transfer it to another permanent license because we're not selling them. Now, there are a very small number of licenses that will be maintained and sold as permanent licenses even after the July 31st date. Advanced Steel is one example of that. It's for just a little longer period of time, but those also will eventually transition out to a subscription-based only licensing or maintaining them on a maintenance subscription. You know, some folks have asked, should they be stocking up on permanent licenses? And as I've shared with customers before, that's really not a question I can answer. Every organization is different. You may find that you know what your staffing cycle is, what that ebb and flow is, and you might want to buy a couple extra permanent licenses so you have them when you need them. You may look at it and say hybrid works perfectly fine for me. And so with so many variables, it's hard for me to say, yes, you should buy some extras, or no, you should not. Hopefully some of the information we're sharing with you today, the additional information that CAD-1 can help you with and to talk through with, as well as additional information on Autodesk.com, can help provide you some insight as what the best route is for you to go. Now, I talked about converting standalone permanent licenses to a network. And again, I just want to reemphasize that if you have licenses that are permanent, that are standalone, and you want to convert those to a network, you must do that prior to us having our end of life for selling new seats. So again, most of the individual licenses that I showed on the screen for January 31st, you'd want to do network activations by that date. And for the design suites and the balance of the rest of most of our individual solutions, you'd want to do by July 31st. So again, if you have questions, please check with Stan and his team, and they'll be able to help verify for you what your timelines are and when you should make some decisions. The last question that I'll kind of talk through here is, will you be able to purchase a desktop suite? Right, so I've talked about our individual solutions that we have today that are sold as permanent are also available, or going to all be available on desktop subscriptions. But I didn't talk about the suites. So when I talk about suites, the best thing I can tell you is we are committed to making sure that customers have access to software, whether it's terms in the time frame, the amount of time they want to have that license, or if they even want to have a license for one of our softwares, or if they want to leverage the flexibility of having a license that gives them access to multiple different softwares within the Autodesk family of products. We're committed to do that. I don't have details for you right now about the desktop suites and how that will be delivered. We're about a little over 6 months away from that. So on that one, I do want to say stay tuned, and as more information becomes available, CAD-1 will be sure that we get that to you. So one last thing, just as we're kind of coming kind of close to a closure here, is, you know, what should you do next? Hopefully the information I shared with you in terms of deadlines was not new to you, but hopefully you were able to get some information that does help you in making a decision. Do these deadlines impact you, and how do you want to move forward? You know, it's hard to cover every possible scenario, so I try to hit the big bucket of topics of most common questions. So here's what I recommend you do. One, always do a review of your technology to really ensure that you're capable to compete, not just today, but even going forward as we see these shifts within the market. Second, I really recommend you set up a meeting, if you haven't already, with CAD-1 to really review your business specifics and ensure that all of your stakeholders are participating in that meeting. So if you're listening to this webcast and you're not responsible for installing or deploying software, I would recommend that someone in your organization who is participates in the meeting with CAD-1. At the same time, if it doesn't matter to you how software is funded, meaning if it's from a capital expenditure or an operating expense, you may want to find out who in your organization does care about that and have them join the meeting. Good news is, if you're a user of our software and you don't deploy it and you just want to make sure that you've got access to software, the great news is you're going to have the same great software whether it's on a permanent license or it's on a subscription-based license. But I recommend you sit down with CAD-1 and lay a strategy, just not how you're going to subscribe to your software or which contracts you're going to maintain, but how are you going to move forward, what technology you can use to leverage, and how you can be competitive going forward. So with that, Stan, I'm going to ask you, we've got a few minutes left, if you'd like to join back and see if there have been any other questions that have come up from your customers that we can also address.
Well, Kim, we've been fortunate in that we have so many really bright customers who picked up on this well, or it's just completely baffled them, I'm not sure. But anyway, the point of the matter is we had a few questions come in, but they kind of got answered in context, and I've been kind of communicating behind the scenes with some of the folks, so I think we're good. There is one question, and Heidi, if you're listening, maybe you could help out. A couple people asked for a URL for all of these changes on, kind of a concise URL for all of these changes. Is there one on the Autodesk site? If one of you could maybe send that to me or whatever, you probably sent it to me already. Anyway, that being the case, Kim is absolutely right. We'd love to set up a meeting, call Kelly, Chris, Carla, myself, whoever's appropriate, and we'd be happy to come out and talk with you. CAD-1 is also an Autodesk authorized software asset management partner, which means basically we can help you run an analysis on the software that you have, make sure that it's all deployed correctly. We can also look at the usage that you are running, so maybe it's appropriate for you to network a few seats and share them and move things around. And also by looking at that usage, it gives you a great way to kind of determine, how much, if you do need more software, what do you need and when. Maybe a term license or a desktop subscription would be absolutely appropriate. So there's a lot of things that we can do to help you out. Please give us a call if there's any questions about any of this. And other than that, Kim, we thank you so much. Folks, we are going to... Yes.
Stan, I thought of one other thing that you and I and Heidi chatted about that I'm not sure I covered here that has come up from a question from your customers, and that is about aligning and prorating subscription contracts.
Yes, thank you.
To align at the same time. And so if you have maintenance subscription contracts today that you're maintaining, and then you also will have some desktop subscription contracts, those can be prorated and coordinated so that they expire at the same time. They still will be run as two different contracts, right? One for the maintenance, one for a desktop, but they can be prorated or co-termed, right? So they end at the same time. And I also wanted to share with you, Stan, we can get you the link. There's one key link on Autodesk.com that many of the other links that I shared with build off of and they'll reference. So we can get you the core link that might make it easy for everyone, and as they read that, they'll see a tag to hit to find the network link as well as all the products impacted by those things.
And we'll send those out to you. We also have a lot of that information on the CAD-1 site, but it's kind of nice to, because we usually lag a little bit behind Autodesk in keeping our site up to date with their information. So if we can provide that, we will. So that's very good. Let's see, what else? I think we're coming to the end. We don't have any other questions that have popped up. thank you so much. We will be doing one, maybe two more of these as the spring progresses and we move towards the end of the suites cycle, so that you know, the questions can continue to be answered, and as Autodesk develops the methodologies and strategies for doing all of these things that will help you make the changes, look for our emails as well as some additional webinars to support you in making the best business decision for your company. So with that, Kim, anything else in closing? Otherwise, we'll wrap her up.
No, thank you very much for having me join you. It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks very much, folks. We appreciate it, and we will talk to you soon. Bye now.